Today we're in the Maldives, and the Maldives is a huge country with thousands of islands and hundreds of hotels. It can be really confusing to know what to expect. So in this video, we're going to tell you the top things you need to know before you book your trip to the Maldives.
So stay tuned. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Max.
I'm Marin.
And we're Voyager. We post weekly videos with travel tips, hotel reviews, and videos from some of our favorite destinations around the world. So if you don't already, consider subscribing. And if you like this video and find the information useful, make sure to give us a thumbs up. All right, so let's jump right into it. The most important things that you need to know now before you book your trip to the Maldives.
The first thing you need to know is where the Maldives even is, so location. And it's located just off the coast of India. What a lot of people don't know is that the Maldives is really not that remote. It's only 3 hours from the Middle East, it's 5 hours from Singapore, and 7 hours from Hong Kong. So if you're booking flights, see the prices are extraordinarily high. Take a look into some of the hubs like Hong Kong, Dubai, or Singapore.
Coming from the US, it seems like the Maldives can be really far away. But oftentimes, if you're booking through one of those major hubs, as Marian mentioned, you can sometimes get a really good flight deal, because what you'll do is you'll end up catching flights that are coming back through their main hubs. For instance, if you're flying Emirates or Qatar, you might fly through Dubai, or through the Middle East. If you're flying through Turkish Airlines, you might actually fly through Turkey as a hub, which is also a good option, which is only about a 9 or 10 hour flight. And then coming through, we came on Hong Kong Airlines, flying through Hong Kong. So again, there's a lot of different options for ways that you can kind of piece together your trip. In some ways that you will actually end up with a somewhat inexpensive flight. So when you fly into the Maldives, you'll be flying into the main city of Malé, which is the international airport. There's also another international airport in Adu City. That airport code is GAN. And so that's another place where you might want to pay attention to what hotels you're actually booking. We'll talk a little bit more about where you're booking hotels and how transfers work. Oftentimes, some of the hotels are in the very southern part of Malé. And if you do find a flight deal, it could be easier to book directly into GAN Airport than it is to book into Malé Airport. So just something to consider. There's not a huge amount of hotels that are developed in that area, but if you are staying at some of the more popular ones like the Shangri-La or even the Park Hyatt, those hotels are also accessible from the south. So just something to consider depending on where you're coming from.
The second thing you need to know is about seasonality. In a lot of the world, low season and high season is based mostly on weather. However, that's not really the case in the Maldives because the weather is pretty much always amazing.
Yeah, a lot of people tend to not want to book in anything that's considered a low season because they automatically assume that the weather's not going to be good. And now, there are times of the year where the weather's going to fluctuate, and you can definitely look those up. We've actually linked in the description below to a great place where you can look at trends and seasonality for what the varying seasons actually are in terms of weather in the Maldives. But another thing to remember is when you look at your trip with weather, there's always a lot of variation. Here we are on very small islands, and so oftentimes in any island place, when you look at the weather report, it's going to say that it's cloudy, it's going to say that it's rainy, and that's because clouds tend to condense around land. Now, the Maldives is a little different in that these islands are so small that if there ever is a storm, they usually pass by very quickly. That's not to say that you can't get bad weather and end up here for, a week with bad weather, but really that's just luck of the draw, and there's not really much you can do about that.
In the Maldives, high season tends to be around Christmas, the New Year, Chinese New Year, and summer holidays. A lot of European travelers and Asian travelers come at different points of the year, so there are multiple high seasons. So if you catch a good deal, you might be catching a low time for the hotel occupancy, and it's totally worth booking.
But if you're a honeymooning couple, there's a good chance that you might be a little bit flexible with when you're able to go. So make sure to take a look at some of the other times. April and September can be great times to book. You'll really find some great prices. And another really important thing to remember is to hit that like button. If you haven't already, be sure hit the like button right now.
The third thing you need to know is flight times. When you're booking flights to the Maldives in particular, unlike some other destinations around the world, it's really important to pay attention to when your flight gets into Malé. A lot of flights land around 11 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock at night, or alternatively, very early in the morning. So if you have a flight that arrives late at night, be aware that seaplanes do not operate after dark.
Yeah, that's a really important thing to know. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about transfers. Once you get to Malé, that's not the end of your trip. You do still have to get to your hotel. And so that's part of the complication that goes into actually figuring out your flight deals. And oftentimes, flights will leave here in the evening very late at night. So for that last day, plan with the hotel as much as you can to be able to stay as late as possible so that they don't book you on one of the earlier seaplanes. As the old expression goes, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So early on, email the hotel. We always insist this in our videos, but email the hotel, make sure that you're the squeaky wheel, because you're way more likely to be on that later plane if you're the one that actually said something, versus having to leave at 9 a.m. on your last day and ending up in Malé for almost 16 or 17 hours. It could be a really bad way to end your trip.
The fourth thing to keep in mind is how to find hotels. It can be really overwhelming when you're looking at a list of hotels you've never heard of. So here's a tip. There are more hotels than just the big brands in the Maldives. And when you originally search on Google, you're going to see things like the Fairmont, the Park Hyatt, the Marriott hotels. But if you search on Trivago, so trivago.com, we'll link that below, you're going to be able to find so many hotels because they're pulled from all over the internet.
A lot of people have this concept when they first look at the Maldives that, there's 10 or 15 big luxury hotels, and that tends to be a lot of the stuff that you see, but really there's hundreds of hotels that have been developed here. The first hotel was developed in the Maldives, and after that, it has just grown at an astronomical rate, and new hotels are being developed and opening almost every day. It really does seem that way. They're actually in the process of building and reinforcing islands so that they can build more hotels. Tourism is the main industry here in the Maldives, and so that luxury hospitality experience and continuing to build hotels, it's where the government's resources are focused, it's where local finance is, and it's where almost everyone in the Maldives is being trained in some capacity of the hospitality industry. Whether they're flying planes, be chefs or restaurateurs, or learning how to be bell staff, there's really so much hospitality focus in the Maldives.
So when you are looking at hotels, go to trivago.com, search for your price range, your dates, and the 5-star or 4-star logo, whatever you're looking for, and start to filter that way. It'll be a lot less overwhelming, and you can get linked right off to TripAdvisor reviews.
Another great way to find hotels is go to Google Maps on your phone or on a computer and simply go to Malé, type in hotel, and start to drag the map around. Go from area to area, click search this area to refresh the area, and you'll be able to see all the hotels that are on small little islands. And it's really a great way to discover, because sometimes when you just go through Google, what you're gonna find is that the companies that are spending the most or are doing really good advertising through SEO and have really optimized their sites, they're the ones that are gonna be popping up the most often. But that actually leaves a whole wealth of boutique hotels that are also competing for your business that are really going to want you to book. And so that's a great way to find those hotels.
The fifth tip we have for you is around how to book hotels. Booking direct is probably going to be the easiest in most cases. If you book direct with the hotel, you can often get a great deal because they are competing for your business with things like Expedia and Booking.com. But not only that, they have all of your information and they'll be in direct contact with you, which is particularly important when it comes to transfers. It can be really difficult if you book through something like Expedia or Booking.com because the hotel does not get your email address, and the transfers are always the additional costs, and it adds a lot of headache.
And we're always big proponents of booking direct. Oftentimes when you do find a competing price on Expedia, Orbitz, or one of the other travel sites, you do have the ability to contact the hotel directly and see if they'll match that price. Oftentimes a really good way to go, and in particular in the Maldives, because of the transfers and some of the complications around actually getting to your property, which we'll talk more about later, it is definitely something that we do recommend. However, that's not to say that you can't find great deals on other travel sites.
For example, something like Luxury Escapes is a great exception. Luxury Escapes usually combines transfers and other amenities, so that can be a great deal. You just sign up, it's free.
Services like Luxury Escapes are great too, just because it does take care of a lot of the headache for you. You don't really have to think about what you're bundling in your package and how all that works. And there are a number of other sites that are like that. We'll list a couple in the description below that we really like.
The sixth tip is around transfer companies and timing.
Transfers is a big deal here in the Maldives. When you're booking your hotel, it's important to understand where the location is, what possible transfer you're going to be doing, and also the associated costs. Transfers are really, really expensive. They often range anywhere between $200 or so for a boat transfer, all the way up to $500 or $600 for seaplane transfers or other transfers. By the time you get everything added up, it's an additional cost on your vacation that can really make things steep. So if you are looking at packages that do include transfers, don't just brush that off as something insignificant.
Great deal.
It's really a great deal if you're including transfers, and make sure to take that into account when you're looking at room rates. So there's really about 3 main ways that you're going to be transferring when you arrive to the Maldives. The most common is to be transferred by seaplane. There are 2 main operators of seaplanes in the Maldives, and they each have contractual obligations to individual hotels. So you're not going to be picking by price who your seaplane company is. Unfortunately, you're just stuck with whatever the hotel provides, and whatever the seaplane transfer is. However, it is important to know that those are different operators. And if you're here for a longer period of time, there are a lot of people that skip around from hotel to hotel to try and try a couple different experiences, or maybe stay in a much nicer place for a couple nights and then move over to a less expensive place for a few nights after that. There are different combinations, but if you're thinking about doing that, seaplane transfers is a really important thing to consider. You can look up on Trans-Maldivian Airlines and on Maldivian Airlines, the two main operators, what hotels they service. And so if you are going to pick two hotels, we highly recommend picking them where they're serviced by the same company. The number one reason for that is it just creates way less of a headache and way less of timing issues, because they can actually plan you on planes where you're going to be able to either fly direct from property to property, or at least have a much shorter time in Malé when you have to transfer back through Malé.
The second option is domestic flights. Some of the islands do not get serviced by seaplanes, so therefore you might have to take a domestic flight. Taking a domestic flight adds about a half day of travel just between checking in, the luggage, getting your ticket, boarding the plane, and they're often pretty delayed because they don't get priority over some of the other aircraft in Malé.
Yeah, there are a lot of private aircraft that do land in Malé, and oftentimes that can delay your flight because those private aircrafts coming in from Abu Dhabi and Dubai, Singapore, they're going to get priority on the runway, so that oftentimes will delay those domestic flights.
The third option is by boat. So some properties are close enough to Malé where they actually just pick you up on a boat. For example, the one and only, there's also New Waldorf Astoria. So when you land in Malé, it's actually really easy to get to the hotel. So that's another thing to keep in mind, particularly if you do have a later flight. The boats can travel by night, so you might be able to leave the property a lot later.
Now, there are exceptions to all of these rules. Some hotels have arrangements with the seaplane companies where they'll be able to actually fly later in the evening than you would normally. Some hotels have their own seaplanes, and some hotels are very close to small runways where they might actually fly you in and then boat you in. There's a number of different variations. You just want to make sure that depending on your timing, when you arrive at the airport, when you're going to be departing, how far your hotel is from Malé, or if you're flying south into Adu City, Gan Airport, it's definitely important to consider how you're going to be transferring and what those transfers look like. Oftentimes, it's kind of a situation of planes, boats, and more boats. Another thing to note is most of this does apply to luxury 4- and 5-star hotels. If you're booking at 3-star hotels or looking at guest houses in the Maldives, you may actually be working with the airline a little bit more directly, or taking ferries. There are ferry options in the Maldives where you can go from island to island. It really just does kind of depend on what tier you're on. And if that's something that you have more questions about, you can check out the link that we've put in the description below here to a blog that we've written all about transfers in the Maldives.
The seventh thing we want to cover is beach versus a water villa. A lot of people ask us, well, what's better? And it really depends on the hotel. So the biggest advice I can give you is when you do find a hotel that you like, be sure to go through each room description before you choose your hotel, because not all beach and water villas are created equal.
It's a really important thing to consider. A lot of people have that honeymoon dream of being in an overwater villa, and that's pretty much all they look at. Really, some of the beach villas can be amazing. They're on that beautiful white sand, and oftentimes at certain hotels, those beach villas might actually be a preferable room. Water villas can often be a lot smaller. They can be over water that's not as desirable. They can be rooms that have gone through a lot more wear than a lot of the property. There's a lot of things to consider when booking a water villa. That said, it can also be absolutely amazing.
So it really just depends. I would highly encourage you to check out the website, look at the square footage, look at the features in the room, what the added amenities are before you decide what to book, because we've stayed in a number of beach villas that are truly incredible with their outdoor bathrooms, outdoor showers, which of course you won't get in a water villa since it's not as big.
Another thing we recommend doing is trying to find out how many rooms the property actually has and what the division of those rooms are. How many overwater huts do they have? How many beach villas do they have? And then where are those spread out? Now, you can do this research by going through TripAdvisor, by going to the hotel's website, and as we mentioned before, we love Google Maps. You can go to the satellite view on Google Maps and you can literally just look at the property from the air and count. Figure out where they are, what the location is, and even better, figure out what the water looks like. From a Google Maps satellite image, it's one of the best ways to figure out, do I want to be on the left side of the huts or the right side of the huts? Now, some hotels will actually give you the option to book those. They might call a room a superior or a luxury version of the water villa, or they might call it a horizon or a sunset view. There's a number of different variations in that naming, whereas other hotels won't. It does depend on the hotel whether or not you're actually going to be able to book the specific room that you want. But oftentimes, if you hunt through TripAdvisor, you find a room number, you try and get a hold of the hotel map, or you just reach out to the hotel, they are usually willing to work with you to try and figure out what room type you're looking for, because oftentimes most travelers aren't actually going through the trouble of doing that.
The eighth thing we want to talk about is additional costs of things like food or activities. The Maldives is an amazing place. Along with some of this luxury comes higher prices on certain things like food and alcohol. We'll talk more about the alcohol later on, but there are very high taxes here. So if you are looking at hotels, we see more and more all-inclusive resorts popping up, or options like half board or full board that include food that are typically at a lower cost than what you'd see when you show up and pay by meal.
Really does depend on the hotel. I'm sure if you're watching this video, you're already researching hotels, and as you're looking at those hotels, you might just be comparing the price tag, face value, and saying, well, this is the cost of a nightly room versus another nightly room. But another thing to consider is the menu prices. How much is food? If you're looking at all-inclusive package, that's one thing, but even if you're just looking at hotels where you're going to be booking the nightly rate and then planning to eat in restaurants or have breakfast, some hotels have exorbitantly high restaurant costs, and others have surprisingly low restaurant costs. So it's one of those things to just really take a look at. Again, we really recommend going through TripAdvisor, seeing if you can find menus, reading forums, linked a couple of our favorite forums below, and just trying to figure out what are the costs of food.
And the reason we call this out is because when you're in the Maldives, you're not getting off this island. So wherever you are, that's where you're going to be for those days. So if the food prices are really out of your budget, we'd recommend checking out another hotel, even if the room rate is just slightly higher.
There's very seldom times where you're going to be able to go to a different hotel. There are some exceptions to that, where some neighboring hotels are close enough that they do offer going to another hotel's restaurant, but pretty much you're stuck with what facilities are on property. So whatever restaurants are on that property are what you're gonna have to eat at for your 5-day trip or your 10-day trip or your 15-day trip. So just keep that in mind. If there's only 2 restaurants on property, you better be really happy with what those restaurants are, because those are the only ones you're gonna have for your stay.
The last thing we're gonna say about the additional costs here is that if you are looking at a hotel that offers an all-inclusive package at an otherwise not all-inclusive resort, it is very common to see that you'll only have access to one of the restaurants or 2 of the restaurants of all of the restaurants on the property. So be sure to read the terms and conditions in any package that you book to make sure you're getting exactly what you want. And if you are not sure what any of these things mean that we're talking about, let me break it down for you. Often, hotels can either provide you a room rate, they can do a room plus breakfast rate, which will just include daily breakfast. Sometimes it's a credit, sometimes it's the buffet. There's also often half-board packages, which include breakfast and dinner, and typically include soft drinks, water, coffee, tea.
Although not always. Again, pay attention to the fine print, because on half-board packages sometimes, you will still have to pay for things like water and soft juices depending on the hotel.
Often they also provide a full board option, which includes breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Again, sometimes they include water, soft drinks, coffee, tea, etc. And then there's the all-inclusive package, which includes alcohol plus meals at any time of the day.
And an important thing to note, if you didn't catch that distinction, is full board is not the same thing as all-inclusive. Very important thing to note. Full board usually will not include alcohol, and all-inclusive usually will. However, we have had certain exceptions to that at certain resorts that we've been to, where we have been on an all-inclusive package that did not include alcohol.
So again, read every term and condition that you find when you're booking. The ninth thing we want to call out is that the Maldives is a conservative Muslim country. It is governed by conservative Islamic law, and therefore there are certain things that are just not acceptable in the Maldives. One thing they don't tell you when you get on the plane is when you land in Malé, if you have alcohol in your luggage, they're going to take it from you, and they're really nice. They keep it for you, you can come back and claim it on your way out, but no alcohol is allowed to be transferred between islands into the country at all.
So if you're flying through a major international airport and you come up with the clever idea, hey, I'm gonna buy some duty-free alcohol so that I can take it to my resort and then I don't have to pay their exorbitant alcohol fees.
No.
Unfortunately, that one doesn't work. They're gonna confiscate it from you once you land at the airport, and you'll be able to pick it up on your way back, but that's tough luck. But unfortunately, that's just how it goes. Another thing to consider is nudity and topless bathing. There are some resorts that do cater more to a European audience. However, again, as Maren mentioned, because of the very conservative nature of the surrounding islands and the people that are working on property, it is just something to consider.
If you are going into Malé, when you are at the airport and you have a layover, or if you're spending the night there, it's also something to keep in mind that you should dress a little bit more conservatively than you would on a traditional beach vacation, just out of respect to the people. There are no laws against having to cover your head or anything like that when you're in Malé, but it can be very disrespectful if you are dressed inappropriately in the center of the city. One other thing to keep in mind is if you do end up booking a hotel that's not on a private island, so this is typically looking at things like 3-star or lower hotels, some of the beaches are public, so if the hotel does not have a private beach, you are not allowed to wear a bathing suit on the beach.
If you are booking in guest houses or 3-star hotels and under, it is possible that you're not on a private island and you're on a shared island with a village that has a mosque that might be more conservative, and how you're going to be bathing and where you're allowed to go is a really big consideration.
The last thing we want to talk about is really just knowing what you're getting with the Maldives. The Maldives is the perfect place for a pristine beach vacation.
It's the dream honeymoon. It's the overwater huts or the beach villas. We love both.
We love both.
And just being on that incredibly white sand, crystal blue water, everything beautiful.
However, if you're looking for a cultural immersion or looking to really get in touch with the locals, while there are some islands where you can do a little bit more of this, this is not what the Maldives is about. This is about you being alone with your family, meeting people at the resorts, but you're not going to get the cultural immersion that some people want when they go on vacation.
And so it's just important to understand that that cultural trip that you might get if you're going to places like Fiji or French Polynesia, the Maldives is really way more focused on the luxury experience. It's focused on the overwater huts, the pristine, beautiful blue beaches, the 5-star dining, and it's a great honeymoon destination and an amazing place to come with your family. But just to keep that in mind, it's definitely not the full cultural immersion or anything like that. Again, as Marin said, there are small exceptions to that.
So if you've enjoyed this video, be sure to give us a thumbs up.
And if you don't already, hit that subscribe button. It really means a lot to us. If you have any questions or feedback, we'd love to hear where you're going, what you're thinking about booking. Write us in the comments below. We love getting feedback.
And if you want to see photos from our trip, be sure to follow us on Instagram at Voyager Guru.
And go check out our blog at voyagerguru.com. In the description below, we have a bunch of blogs that we talked about during this video, and we have a bunch of other helpful resources that you'll find on our blog, from hotel reviews to our ebook on the best credit cards for travel.
And as always, I'm Marin.
And I'm Max.
And we're Voyager Guru. See you out there.